We're 13 days into the war in West Asia. President Trump says Iran is running out of time. But Tehran is warning of a long war, a war that would destroy the world economy. A week of war has cost US more than $11 billion. Ships, tankers and oil fields are already under fire. My colleague Diksha Bisla is here to take us through more. Diksha, take us through the latest details that you're picking up.
Right, Kanishka, and of course we understand that the situation in West Asia, it is deeply volatile and still pretty fluid. Now, in the latest, Iran has warned that it could wage a prolonged war with the United States and Israel that would destroy the world economy. Iran said that it targeted commercial vessels after they entered the Strait of Hormuz, ignoring the warnings of its navy. And Iran's Revolutionary Guards has said that they did warn that the strikes would happen and they would target the economic centers and banks which are linked to US and Israeli interests. Well, oil prices have jumped above $100 as we speak, and oil prices surged more than 9% to break back above the $100 mark after fresh Iranian strikes on, the supplies and infrastructure in West Asia. Meanwhile, Brent crude jumped over 9.3% to $100.50. Meanwhile, Bahrain has told residents to stay home after an Iranian attack on fuel tanks. Now, Bahrain's Interior Ministry, it has released a video showing a massive fire at the facility, which is located northeast of the capital, Manama. And the footage captures a huge blaze, which is engulfing the fuel tank as firefighters rush to the scene, working to contain the flames. And authorities say that the fire followed Iranian attacks targeting sites across the region. Well, 2 oil tankers were attacked off Iran's coast. At least 1 crew member of the ship was killed, and several are still missing, while 38 people had been rescued. We understand that the search and rescue operations are ongoing to trace the missing people as we speak. And reports say that Oman has evacuated all vessels from a key oil export terminal as a precautionary measure. Mina Al Falal, which sits outside the Strait of Hormuz, is one of the few remaining ports from which crude from West Asia can be shipped to global markets. Well, a Bloomberg News report says that Oman has now decided to evacuate all vessels from the port. And this is in view of the Iranian attacks in the region. Just yesterday, drones struck Oman's Salalah port, setting some silos on fire. And a British maritime security firm said that all storage facilities were struck on Wednesday. Well, this is where the situation stands in West Asia, Kanishka. But of course, it is an evolving situation. And we'll have to wait and see how either sides calibrate the next move going forward.
Absolutely. We'll keep tracking those developments and we'll keep bringing it to our viewers. And for now, we are joined by Jennifer Parker from Canberra. She's adjunct professor at Defence and Security Institute at the University of Western Australia. Hi, Ms. Parker. Thank you so much for joining us today on WION. Now, let's talk about the latest developments first off. Now, Trump says that Iran is on the verge of defeat. He has also warned that US forces could escalate strikes such that the country would be almost impossible to rebuild. How solid do you think that claim is, given that Iran is retaliating with all its might?
Look, the US certainly has the firepower to choose to do that, but I think that is unlikely. I think where we are is still in a phase of the conflict where the US is trying to take out Iran's ballistic missile capability and its drone-making capability, the latter being more challenging. It's not unexpected, I think, that Iran has broadened this conflict to be targeting the economic capabilities, particularly the oil facilities across the region. That would be largely expected. I wouldn't read anything into those comments that we're about to see an end to this conflict anytime soon. I think the US has been very clear that they have 4 key military objectives: destruction of Iran's ballistic missile capabilities, their nuclear capabilities, their proxies, and their navy. Nuclear capabilities and proxies will be the most challenging. I think the US are going to continue to work through the target set for those. So I don't see this wrapping up anytime soon, but I don't see the US switching gears to go to other targets that would target broader infrastructure of Iran. That would not be in their interest at this point.
Ms. Parker, like you were highlighting, doesn't look like that this is going to stop anytime soon. But in terms of cost, the Trump administration has estimated that the war cost is over $11 billion in just about 6 days. Now, Iran says it is ready for a long war. Do you think it's a sustainable claim?
Oh, look, Iran certainly has an impressive military capability and it shouldn't be underestimated. The US are clearly working through targeting Iran's ballistic missile sites, the ballistic missiles, which of course are being fired across Gulf states and having a significant impact. The US will likely be able to, with time, take out a lot of that capability. The The second issue, though, is really Iran's drone-making capability. Iran is world-leading in many ways when it comes to attack uncrewed aerial vehicles. We saw Iran in the last couple of years exporting this capability to Russia. It is one of the reasons Russia has been effective in taking out some of the Ukraine's energy facilities. These are much harder to deal with because they can be built almost anywhere. They're quite small. They can be launched from the back of trucks. That is a problem that the US are going to have to deal with in order to reduce the attacks on Gulf states and reduce the impact on the global economy. But to this point, the determination of when the war ends is not necessarily up to Israel or the US. Iran very much has a say in this. That said, if the US get to the point where they have reduced their bombing campaign on Iran, it would not be in Iran's interest to continue attacking their neighbours in the Gulf states or impacting the global economy, because as it does this, it's also impacting its economy. It is reliant on the Strait of Hormuz, for example, to get its oil out from Kharg Island.
Right. You've made a very interesting point that all of this disruption is not only disrupting the global economy, but also Iran's own economy. Now, when we talk about the war front, from drone and missile strikes on land infrastructure, the West Asia conflict is now witnessing attacks on tankers and ships in the waters, right? In the latest, Iranian explosive-laden boats appear to have attacked 2 fuel tankers in Iraqi waters. What is your reading of the conflict that's evolving into maritime and naval-focused war?
Yeah, look, this is not unexpected in many ways. Certainly when Iran feels under pressure, even short of conflict, they tend to retaliate in the maritime domain. And we saw during the 2019-2020 Gulf crisis, during the first Trump administration, Iran attacking a number of vessels. This clearly is a new phase. If we think Phase 1 of Iran's response was hitting military facilities across the Gulf countries. Phase 2, hitting Gulf countries' energy infrastructure. Phase 3 is very much trying to deter any transits of the Strait of Hormuz by hitting merchant shipping in the region and also hitting port infrastructure. This is clearly having an impact. Vessels are not transiting through the strait, maybe 1 or 2, but certainly not the numbers that you would normally see, 120, 130 a day. The US now needs to become very focused on taking out both the facilities used to launch uncrewed surface vessels along Iran's coast and also the uncrewed aerial vehicle capability. Until there is a reduction in attacks on merchant shipping, we won't see merchant shipping having the confidence to go through that strait. So that needs to be the priority focus. I know there's been discussion about solving this through escorts. We've seen the French president, Emmanuel Macron, talk about this, and President Trump. Neither of that, I would assess, is likely at this point. There is no point trying to escort tankers through. Why Iran maintains such an uncrewed aerial vehicle and uncrewed surface vessel capability. The numbers that you would be able to get through versus the impact on the amount of ships you would need to divert to do that, ships that can be targeting land targets ashore, it's not in their interest at this point.
Right. Ms. Parker, you said a very interesting point that the confidence won't be restored anytime soon to pass through that strait unless those attacks sort of reduce. That confidence has sort of been shaken. But speaking of naval attacks, Iran has also confirmed that it attacked Thai cargo ship that was bound for India. While India has condemned those attacks, do you expect such episodes to rise, or, we'll have to go through another route altogether?
So I think that those episodes will continue. Iran will continue to attack merchant vessels and innocent civilian mariners. We need to highlight that these merchant vessels are not lawful targets under the law of armed conflict. These are innocent civilian mariners on board who are being impacted and have sadly lost their lives. They will continue to do this while they have the ability to do so. When it comes to the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz is the only way into or out of the Persian Gulf. We will still see tankers and container ships running the gauntlet, for whatever better term, but not in any significant numbers until these attacks are reduced.
Let's wait for how and when those attacks actually reduce. But Ms. Parker, you recently analyzed the legal aspects of such attacks, right? Of the US sinking the Iris Dana near Sri Lankan waters. Now, what does the engagement signal about the shift from maritime policing to high-end blue water naval combat that we are seeing this year?
Well, look, I think that when we think about sea power, we often think about what are non-traditional threats: illegal fishing, irregular maritime migration, pollution. The Indo-Pacific, of course, is a maritime region. The world is dependent on its maritime arteries. And we did see the sinking of the IRS Dina, the Iranian frigate, in the vicinity of Sri Lanka by the US. It shows that there is a key naval and maritime element of this conflict, and it shows that any crisis or conflict in either the Indo-Pacific or the Middle East region will have a maritime nexus. That is very clear because many of the countries in this region, whether that be India or whether that be Australia, certainly have vulnerabilities when it comes to the dependence on the maritime domain, as does the global economy. So this will always be a point of contestation. As the global situation continues to deteriorate, we will unfortunately see more targeting of vessels in the maritime domain.
Of targeting, and another key point of contention is the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, which you were earlier also highlighting, and its effects are being felt across the world. Now, based on your experience serving the US Fifth Fleet, how sustainable do you think is the current functional blockade of the strait?
Well, look, it's difficult to describe what Iran has achieved. They have not effectively blockaded the strait. Now, they have no navy to speak of. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Navy, which is their asymmetric navy, has also been diminished. The way that they are significantly reducing throughput through the strait is by deterring vessels because of the threat of attack. Now, in the first week of this conflict, vessels were not willing to go through because of insurance and the need for war risk insurance. Lloyd's of London is reporting that that is pretty much resolved. And now the issue is these attacks. Now, if the US can impact these attacks by reducing Iran's availability of uncrewed surface vessels and uncrewed aerial vehicles targeting their port facilities along the coast, then you will see more vessels going through. But those vessels will need to have the confidence that it is safe for them to do so. I don't think that that's in the next day or two. It may well be in the next week or so, depending on how this conflict develops, because on the other side of this is the pressure that those vessels will have an economic imperative to get through, and the vessel owners and insurers will be weighing up the risk. So if we see a reduction in Iran's ability to strike these vessels, you will see more throughput, but not returning to the normal levels of ships going through that strait.
Right, we may not see those normal level of ships going through that strait anytime soon. But do you believe that the IMEC, or the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, that the regions that you were talking about, is that corridor effectively dead, or do you believe maritime security contracts, they will eventually restore confidence in these lanes?
Oh, look, eventually there will be a restoration of confidence in these lanes because it is so important to the global economy. And the movement of ships is generally driven by economic imperatives. But we won't see a restoration to where we were before this conflict until the conflict is ceased. We will see, of course, an increase in throughput of ships through the Strait of Hormuz, but there will need to be a focus when this conflict does eventually end on building confidence with ship owners and operators for them to operate in this region.
Right. And since we are talking about the region and the Strait of Hormuz specifically, now against the backdrop of this blockade and attack on oil tankers and refineries in the Gulf region, Iran has warned that the world should be ready for oil at $200 a barrel. If that actually happens, what do you think, what is your expectation, the conflict, the turn that the conflict could take? Could we see more players entering the war perhaps?
Look, I don't think we will see more players entering the conflict in terms of as belligerents as part of this international armed conflict. You may well see more countries operating vessels in the region, military vessels. We've, of course, already seen a build-up of French forces in the Mediterranean and their statement that when the intensive phase of these operations are over, that they will escort ships through. Now, whether they will or not, I think is an open question, but you will see a greater presence. Of course, as I mentioned before, Iran's phase right now is trying to cause as much economic damage as possible to increase the pressure on the US and Israel to stop this bombing campaign. The US and Israel would have been well aware that Iran would undertake this. I mean, for decades, people have talked about the impacts on the Strait of Hormuz if there was a conflict with Iran, and will have factored this into their planning. if this conflict goes on for a prolonged period, that will, of course, have an increased impact regionally and globally. But importantly, I don't think it's about to force different decision-making in the US right now. I think they are adamant on setting back Iran's military capability and working through that target deck.
Right. And you were earlier highlighting how Iran now has Russia support. Now, we do have reports that Russia is providing satellite targeting data to Iran. Now, in your view, how does this industrial and intelligence support from great powers change the maritime threat, landscape for commercial shipping in the Indian Ocean?
Well, look, this doesn't make Russia party to this conflict, but it is clear that they are providing support, and not unexpected, right? Iran has been critical to Russia's ability to prosecute their conflict in Ukraine. We know that through the provision of drones and other capabilities. This, of course, means that although Iran's capabilities are being degraded, they still have the ability to target merchant vessels and potentially naval vessels based on this intelligence. I think what will be key here is isolating Iran both physically and technologically, so cutting off the ability for this information to be transferred to Iran. And as Iran's drone stocks start to diminish, cutting off the northern borders through the use of air power to stop the ability to resupply Iran with the ability to rebuild their drone capability. So isolating Iran will be critical, but not unexpected to see Russia confirmed as providing support to Iran in this conflict. They have had that relationship for some time, and we know, as I said before, that Iran has been critical in the ability of Russia to prosecute their illegal war in Ukraine.
And, you are a defense expert and you were talking about the joint military capabilities. So just wanted your thoughts on the warfare as well. Now, experts are saying that Iran war shows a shift towards AI-driven warfare. How are AI intelligence systems, surveillance technology, and also drone swarms? How is all of that changing how wars are really fought today? If you could, share with us your thoughts over there.
Well, look, the nature of war never changes. It is horrific, but the character of war, the tools and the tactics used to conduct warfare is always evolving. I do think in conflicts like this, we see people quick to jump on terms like AI-driven war or swarms. When it comes to the use of drones that Iran are employing, they certainly are employing saturation attacks. So that is a large number of drones in an attack at one time to make it harder to shoot down. That's not necessarily a swarm being the idea that they can communicate with each other and work together. But we are seeing this evolution of drone warfare on the back of what we saw in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Of course, there will be some use, of artificial intelligence in both the detection, tracking and target selection, probably on all sides. Again, this is not a new aspect of war. When we go back decades now, we've seen artificial intelligence, in its most embryonic form, used in combat systems of warships. What it shows is that the character of war continues to evolve as technology evolves. And we learned that from Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, and we are seeing that now, of course, in this conflict.
Right. Great. Thank you, Ms. Parker, for sharing those thoughts with us. It was lovely chatting with you today. On that note, we'll let you go.
Thanks so much.